Good morning, all you beautiful people. So glad you made it. Found your way around all the twisty trails and so on. Okay, well, you heard part of my international report in our greetings this morning. That's a product of our work, and I do mean our work, not just mine as the International Secretary, but the whole party is involved in it. And I thought, actually this morning, I thought I would start off for people who are new to party conventions to tell you a little bit more, add to what Doug said, so you can understand how the party works. First of all, in the coming days, we're going to be discussing 3 resolutions or papers that have been written at the request of the National Committee. And they will establish the work and our analysis of the situation that we are living through, the political situation. And then once they're adopted, either amended or they could be rejected, we hope not, but they could be. But once they're amended and adopted, then they become the work that we are to do for the coming period until the next convention. As Doug said, these papers have been written so that we could have early before the convention, and we've already had a very thorough discussion in some ways in our branches and also in a written discussion on these documents. But after I speak, Andrea Bauer, who's a member of the Secretariat, who wrote the political resolution for this convention, will be coming up and giving a summary and analysis of that, and then discussion will be open for everyone. It's been about 3.5 years since our last convention, and at that time the party adopted a political resolution entitled One Hemisphere, Undivided, Permanent Revolution, and Neo-Liberalism in America. And this is actually, we have this in our bookstore. This is, we published it in a pamphlet, a book, after it was discussed and amended and rewritten and so on at the last party convention. And this might seem like shameless self-promotion because it has my name on it. But it isn't really. It's the product of the party. It's the product of the party. And so I want everyone to know about this, and if you'd like to get a copy, they're in the bookstore. And I want to start with my talk about our international work from this document, because it's what launched us. Our decisions that were made at the last convention launched us in our international work in the direction that we took. The main line of One Hemisphere was that neoliberalism, the wholesale privatization of natural resources and state-owned industries and services, coupled with the destruction of trade barriers in the global marketplace, was a complete and utter failure on its own terms. Its advocates, from the Democrats and Republicans, including Reagan, Clinton, and Bush, to the World Bank and the WTO, had all promised the world that trade liberalization or free trade would bring greater prosperity for all. In fact, the opposite happened. A tiny minority was enriched, both in this country and all over the world, while the majority, especially in Latin America, were drastically impoverished as every natural resource and state-provided service, healthcare, education, social services, and pensions, was sold to the highest bidder. The unions were gutted, and the country's doors opened to cheap imports. This downward economic spiral, combined with rising expectations, gave birth to massive resistance movements that managed to throw out a number of corrupt governments and governments that were able to set a new so-called democratic. They were more democratic than the governments that came before. And they put populists in power from Venezuela, Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, and Bolivia, all to Washington's great displeasure. This amounted to a continental movement that was so successful that the free trade Agreement of the Americas, the FTAA, which was going to be the height of this movement for neoliberalism, never, ever was able to get passed. And this was a great victory for the people of the Americas. It is going to establish a free trade zone all the way from Alaska and Canada to Tierra del Fuego. And it was defeated. The U.S. had to initiate bilateral trade agreements, free trade agreements, and also the only thing they could get passed that was bigger than just one country, the U.S. to a single country, was CAFTA, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas. But this was a big defeat for U.S. policy. We covered all this in the first half of the last resolution. The second half of One Hemisphere dealt with this country and showed how attacks on labor rights, contracting out government services, and proposals to privatize everything that wasn't nailed down had been ruling class policy in this country since the Reagan administration, regardless of which party was in power. You might remember Al Gore's reinventing government. That's a term for laying off federal workers. Clinton's welfare reform amounted to contracting out welfare-to-work programs to the private sector and to NGOs. Neoliberalism was not something happening to other people. That was a big point about the One Hemisphere, which sometimes in support and anti-free trade movements, you see there's this tendency, well, it's happening to people everywhere else. Our point was, no, it's happening here in this country. The party predicted its intensification as the crisis of capitalism deepened, and predicted greater and greater resistance as U.S. workers realized how they were being sold down the river. 4 years and an economic depression later, the party's analysis has been confirmed. Not only has resistance spread in Latin America, putting more and more governments in power that reject neoliberalism, although not capitalism, the realization that our problems in the U.S. are homegrown has exploded, along with bank failures, Wall Street bailouts, war profiteering, the housing market crash, the furloughing of public employees, a cutback of everything that a working person needs for survival. However, at this point, really the only mass movement it has produced so far with this new anti-corporate attitude is a movement to scapegoat immigrants who've been forced to flee their own countries to escape the fallout of neoliberalism and U.S.-backed political repression. This movement of American firsters, which some of them call themselves that, is nationalistic, racist, pro-capitalist, and some of them are just out-and-out Nazis or fascists. And they're the exact opposite of socialist internationalism. 4 years ago, the party turned toward Latin America to develop relations with socialists there, given political developments in our hemisphere. We have traveled to El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Brazil, Mexico, and Cuba to congresses, conventions, and meetings of the radical left. We've met with revolutionaries, feminists, trade unionists, gays and lesbians, while developing a deeper understanding of the political terrain and debates within the revolutionary socialist movement. As well as, and that's not the only thing we've done, we're not just there to be good learners and good supporters, we've also been sharing our knowledge and our experience as radicals here in this country. In addition to Latin America, itinerant comrades have also introduced the party to activists in Germany, England, and South Africa. So we really have program Will Travel. We actually do that. As a result of this work, we've led fights in this country to defend workers and social movements in our hemisphere and around the world. Among the many labor struggles that we have weighed in on, I think one that we're extremely proud of is the work that we did to stop CAFTA, because we fought in our unions. We got a lot of support in the labor councils in various cities, and eventually we got the AFL-CIO International Office to weigh in at a very critical time when the vote was going on CAFTA. Unfortunately, in Costa Rica. Unfortunately, CAFTA was eventually endorsed, but a big fight was put up, and we were a part of that, especially through the Costa Rican Trotskyists that we were working with. We've done a lot of other things, and I don't have time to go into everything, but I'm going to give you just a little bit of what we have done. We've supported Mexican electrical workers when President Calderon privatized the National Electrical Company this year. We've also supported Mexican miners and their families in northern Mexico, whose 3-year strike was violently broken by the army last month. We've supported Brazilian auto workers, framed up Costa Rican trade unionists, the resistance movement opposing the coup in Honduras, striking Puerto Rican students defending public education, the Pakistani resistance movement fighting to oust President Musharraf, Iranians fighting for democratic rights, Palestinians fighting to end the Israeli occupation, and as you heard in the greetings, Afghani leftists opposing the U.S. occupation in their country. Since our founding, we have existed outside an international organization, not by choice, but by circumstance. However, that has not prevented us from being internationalists, i.e. working-class socialists who stand with the workers and oppressed people in other countries, defending their class and struggling in the social movements of women, gays, indigenous people, and people of color to radicalize these movements. For us, internationalism is not just a moral imperative, it is a strategic imperative. Capitalism is the first world economic system. The globalization of production it has created is progressive. It lays the basis for the development of an international socialist economy and the elimination of poverty on a world scale. However, for that to happen, economic life has to be freed from the destructive and anarchic operations of the capitalist market. The only force on the face of the earth that can complete this task is the international working class. In the face of this reality, it is imperative to build a world movement for socialism that's coordinated and cohesive and on the same page, as we say. That's the problem. That's the difficult thing to do. This project has been on the agenda since Marx and Engels founded the First International in 1864. Now, 146 years later, there's no world organization of revolutionary socialists with the authority to coordinate the struggle. And here I want to make an aside. Revolutionary socialists are quite different from reformist socialists, and especially we're quite different from the Obama school of socialism, which you may have heard of. I mean, anyway, I'll let somebody else deal with that question. Reformist socialists think that it's possible, little by little, piece by piece, to replace socialism or capitalism with socialism. There used to be such social democrats in Europe who advocated this approach, but they got themselves into governments, capitalist governments, and then became responsible for implementing austerity programs, and they no longer even mention this approach. Chavez in Venezuela is a different but a similar type of bit by bit, piece by piece. Then there are other socialists who think socialism can be attained in stages by making alliances first with progressive capitalists, for instance, Ben and Jerry versus BP. And at a later date, attempt socialism. The South African, I like that joke that I put in, but it's really not a joking matter what happens when revolutionary socialists or socialists make alliances with the bourgeoisie. And you can see that today in South Africa. where the South African Communist Party ended up making alliances with the progressive, so-called progressive, bourgeoisie, so that to first overthrow apartheid, establish a democratic regime, and then later on we'll work towards socialism. Well, in fact, things for many, the poorest people in South Africa have gone backwards because of this approach. So as opposed to these two types, revolutionary socialists advocate world socialism, the complete overthrow of the capitalist state, and its replacement by a worker state which oversees the nationalization of major industries and implements a planned economy. In the struggle for socialism, there have been and continue to be huge debates over the question of questions. Where will the forces come from to launch and lead a global struggle for socialism, and around what program can it be done? Various programs and organizational forms and methods of struggle have been tested in successful and unsuccessful revolutions, and any serious revolutionary has to study and learn this history. From the beginning, the Freedom Socialist Party has maintained that the key role of leadership in the revolutionary struggle belongs to the most oppressed, because among these groups the need for revolution is greater than any other, and especially greater than other privileged strata that also belong to the working class. In any society on earth, especially oppressed workers who, in addition to being exploited as workers, are also subject to other forms of discrimination and repression, are the key potentially revolutionary forces: women, racial, ethnic, and national minorities, queers, immigrants, youth, and the disabled. No one needs revolution as badly as we do, and when we win our rights, we push all of society up with us. Furthermore, the FSP has supported the autonomous movements of the super-oppressed and been a very important part of forging radical leadership and a left wing within them. This is the essence of socialist feminism. Not that only women and gays and people of color will be leaders, but that the program that we all fight around will be the one that puts those who have been last first. That way there are no sellouts, no leaving one group behind for this or that reason. We fight together under a working class banner, recognizing that we are not all the same, and that recognition of special demands don't divide the working class. They are the basis of solidarity and strength. It's never seemed... That's so good to hear. Isn't it? It's not everywhere that you can see people standing shoulder to shoulder, right? And in this room, we have a room full of fighters who really do fight and stand together for each other. We don't sell each other out, and that is very, very rare, comrades. Very rare, and we should value each other and ourselves very highly for that. Now, this has never seemed like a very complicated idea to me. Okay. However, for some socialists, this is an extremely subversive idea. They apparently don't trust, well, not apparently, they don't trust autonomous organizing by specially oppressed groups, as though we will be easily led astray by bourgeois influences and enticements if we get together and organize as women, as people of color, as gays and lesbians. Strangely, this never seems to be a problem in the case of radical men working in the autonomous trade union movement. Union men seem to have been born with a better internal guidance system than the rest of us, according to these folks. Actually, I think their fears are very misplaced. Though it does remind me of this story I've told some people, a story I heard about a Southern minister who is reported to have said he was utterly opposed to women-only prayer groups because you never know what they'll pray for. I think that could be the problem. They never know what we'll pray for. Of those radicals that we have held discussions with in Latin America mostly, because that's mostly where we've been, our program of revolutionary socialist feminism has been welcomed by some and is occasionally scorned as dangerous by others. But there are facts that no one can dispute. International capital is scouring the globe for cheap labor, pushing more and more women into the workforce. Even the global depression is upping the number of women who work outside the home here and elsewhere. And I think it was last month, women became, just by the tiniest bit, the majority of the workers in this country. This is like a historic development. And of course, I'm sure you all know it's because of the layoffs in industry where men have more traditionally been employed. And now, in addition to women being in that position in the workforce, and I think I read that something like 200 million women have been added to the workforce internationally, because of course the U.S. capitalism is scouring the world for cheap labor. So, in addition to that fact, with austerity on every politician's lips from Greece to California, women's traditional responsibilities, taking care of children, the elderly, the disabled, the mentally ill, all those responsibilities are being thrust back onto our shoulders if we were lucky enough to have some help from the state in the past, in addition to working outside the home. This is a potentially explosive situation. It is my view that the real battles that lie ahead of us. Let's see, what am I reading here? It is my view that the real battles lie ahead of us. That's it. And women and specially oppressed groups that have never enjoyed the American dream in this country and have mostly known only the American nightmare will be critical to winning these battles. How and who can wage them, and with what form of organization and around what program? These are the questions that Andrea addressed in the political resolution. Lenin wrote, "Without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement." After our experience on the international level, the National Committee decided that presenting our revolutionary socialist feminist theory was the most important contribution we could make to the struggle for international socialism. That and boldly calling for a socialist feminist international, which we have been doing. After all these decades of splits and splintering and instructions not to rock the boat of patriarchy, even in the socialist movement, it is clear women must be front and center in reconstituting a revolutionary socialist international. Somebody has to speak up for Mother Nature and motherhood who doesn't believe in putting a price tag on every human relationship. And now thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite, I turn it back over to the chair. Sorry, I'm done.